Hi folks, John Cordisco back again from Cordisco's Chess Center with another great game here for you. This is a game from the FIDE Candidates Finals that was played the 31st of March, round 13. An incredible game considering the pressure and what was at stake. The white pieces is Timur Radjabov and the black pieces is Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen is the #1 rated player in the world, the kid from Norway. I'm going to call this game never, 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 never give up. The situation on this game was Magnus Carlsen had to win. He lost the prior round to Vishy Anand, and he had to win this game. The way it was working out, him and Vladimir Kramnik were going neck and neck. And the way the tie breaks worked, they figured it out that if they tied at the end, Magnus Carlsen would win on tie breaks and face Vishy Anand later this year for the World Championship. Incredible game, incredible pressure, incredible time trouble, $1 million game in essence. Let's get to it. The black pieces is Magnus Carlsen, the white pieces is Timur Radjabov. Radjabov is from Azerbaijan, I can never pronounce that, and Magnus Carlsen's from Norway. Go for the first few moves here. Amazing game, folks, amazing game. And when you get into the time pressure, I'll explain what's going on later, but okay. It's a Nimzo Indian classical. It's tough. You got the black pieces and they have to win. You have to go all out. Magnus goes not unbeaten d7. Radjabov goes g3. Now let's go back here. The computer suggests, I ran this through an analyzer. The computer suggests that black castles and white goes bishop to d2. That was the alternative moves. g3. Magnus castles. Bishop of g2 and e5. Now if you're looking at this now, what I did was I put the computer on the bottom of the screen. I normally don't do that, but I find it amazing to me that when it gets really complicated and really hard in time pressure, these guys find either the best move or the second best move. It's really incredible. Right now it's a slight advantage for white. Magnus is just, he's the kind of guy, I mean, he's got a lot of opening knowledge, Magnus Carlsen, but not as much as a lot of grandmasters. And what he does, he gets to the middle game, towards the end of the middle game, into the end game, and that's where this kid really, truly is the best player in the world. We're going to see what happens here in the next few moves. White castles and c6. Now you're looking at the bottom of the screen here. I want you to look at, as the moves go by, and see how close these guys get to the computer. It's really incredible. Computer says rook to d1 for move number 2. White goes rook to d1. Now the alternative move the computer had instead of rook to d1 was a3 was the sequence, b takes, queen takes, e4. That was the alternative from rook to d1. Lost my place here, 1 second. Okay. Black plays rook to e8. Now the alternative they had, instead of Carlsen playing rook to d8, was queen to d7, a3. You notice in the last two scenarios he wants to kick that dark squared bishop. Bishop to a5, knight, e takes, and knight to f5 attacking the queen. That was the alternative computer move. After rook to e8 for black, Radjabov took, Carlsen took back, and then finally kicking the dark squared bishop. Carlsen played bishop takes, which surprised me a little bit, having trading that bishop for that knight. Queen takes, and queen to e7. Now as we're looking here, we see the score on the bottom. It looks like white's got a little bit of an edge. But as time goes on here, Radjabov, who is white, gets in some serious time trouble just before the time control at 40 moves. And it's really wild. I remember watching it live, and with the announcers and the time clicking away, and it's incredible pressure on these guys. Instead of queen to e7 for black, the computer suggests queen to c7 and b4 for white, expanding on the queen side. So after queen to e7, white went bishop to b4, excuse me, pawn to b4, knight to b6, and bishop to e3. They're still developing. We're still in the opening. Knight to g4. That surprised me when I saw it. I thought for sure he would do the suggested computer move, which is bishop to g4, and that series would go h3, bishop to e6, knight to d2. I know he's after the dark squared bishop, and white went knight to d2. Now the computer suggests for this as well, instead of knight to d2, bishop to d2. And that series would go e4, knight to d4, e3, bishop takes, knight takes, pawn takes, queen to e5. After white's knight to d2, Magnus played f5. Now I remember watching this game and watching the commentators. I believe it was Lawrence Trent, the international master, was one of the commentators, and they had several guest commentators with him. When I saw this f5 move, I knew Magnus is out for blood. He has to win this game. He has to stay ahead. He knows he's going to win on tie breaks with Vladimir Kramnik, and he has to win no matter what. And like I said, the title of this game is Never, 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 Never Give Up. And you'll see in the next few moves. Now the sequence, instead of f5, suggestion is knight takes e3, queen takes, bishop to g4, and h3. And frankly, I probably would have moved bishop to g4 as well. After black's f5, it's h3, kicking the knight. Now the knight takes the bishop, now the queen takes. That still keeps white's pawns intact, instead of having the pawn here and doubled pawns. Black went e4. Now instead of e4, the suggested move with f5, breaking up his pawns a little bit. And the sequence will go queen to c3, f takes, f takes. That might have exposed the white king a little bit. After black's e4, rook a to c1. Now another suggestion instead of rook a to c1 was c5, expand on the queen side. And knight would go to d5, queen to d4, and b5, locking up that side. And as you'll see later, locking up that side would have made a huge difference in the game. After rook to c1, bishop to e6, and then queen to c3. There's going to be a lot of play in this game. Look at those pawns that black has in the center. Granted, white has a lot of room and space on the queen side. It's going to break loose here shortly, if depending on how it goes. Rook to d8 and bishop to f1. Now that's a fascinating move. You see this a lot in Grandmaster play, where they'll move their bishops on f1, f8, c1, c8. It's really amazing how these guys, they use all the resources. The continuation instead of bishop to f1 would be c5. Knight moves queen to e5, then queen to c7. After rook to d8, black played c5, opening up right away. Now this was Radjabov's opportunity to play the pawn here, which will lock up a lot of that side, and you'll see later in the game what happens. B takes, and knight to a4, simultaneously attacking the queen and the pawn. Another suggestion might have been, instead of knight to a4, queen takes c5 and then e3. After knight to a4, Radjabov went queen to b4. Knight takes c5, knight to b3, rook takes d1. Rook takes, and now knight to a6, attacking the queen. Now the sequence, instead of knight to a6, would be knight takes b3, queen takes b3, b6, and h4. It's a pretty interesting game. Same color bishops. Those two isolated pawns for white on the queen side are going to tell. Other than that, it's look at the score here on the bottom. It's about a quarter of a pawn ahead for black, and that's about right since those pawns are connected on the queen side. Now, after knight to a6, queen takes e7. Rook takes e3. f7. Now the queens are off the board. The kings are going to start moving in. As we all know, the kings are a very powerful piece in the endgame. I've seen it in some books and videos where they estimate the king's value at about 4, more than a knight or a bishop, and just below a rook. So it's a pretty powerful piece. After king to f7, bishop to e2, and b6. What he was trying to do in the end, he was just trying to stop white from coming down here with his pawn. And also to c5 as well. Rook to d8. Now when I saw this move, I was surprised. The commentators were basically saying Radjabov has had a very bad tournament. I mean, he said, it was funny, after the 14th round, which was played today on Monday, April 1st, he normally doesn't lose these many games as he lost in this tournament in a whole year. So I think his confidence was a little down, but he was trying to play a little aggressively. He knew Magnus had to win and probably take some chances. Now, instead of rook to d8, a sequence might have went rook to f1 instead. Rook to d7, knight to the center of the board, and then knight to c5. After white's rook to d8, knight to c5. Right away, I was a little surprised at this, to be honest with you. After knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, Magnus's queenside pawns are isolated. But he's probably looking at maybe trying to trap, or at least negate the effect of the white rook and get him trapped in the back row, or it'll be basically worthless. Knight to d4. Now the sequence here, instead of knight to d4, he might have went knight takes c5, b takes c5, rook to b8. It would have been a slight edge for black, and after that g5. It would have been a slight edge for black, but nothing really to speak of. I mean, this is basically a drawn game so far. After white's knight to d4, king to f6. The king is coming up. And in the next few moves, you're going to see some interesting things happen. King to f1, rook to d7. Magnus wants to get rid of that rook that's filtering around in his back rank. Of course, Radjabov wants no part of it. He wants the rook to harass him. Right now we're on move 31, and Radjabov was getting pretty low on time. The time control for the extra hour is at move 41. You have to have 40 moves in. I think he was trying to get some moves in before the time control because he was starting to get low on time. Bishop to f7. He's trying to negate the scope of White's rook, keep him on the back rank, and basically keep him a rook down, at least for temporarily. Went king to e1 and g6. He was probably worried about the pawn coming down here and here. He was trying to guard the h5 square here. h4, just as he thought he would. h6. Now remember when Magnus played this move, the commentators, I believe at the time, I'm trying to remember, was Robert Fontaine from France, the Grandmaster, and Lawrence Trent, International Master from England. The candidates was played in London, and they didn't really care for h6 that much, to be honest with you. Instead of h6, the sequence might have went knight to e6, which would have brought knight takes e6, king takes, c5, b takes, bishop check, king to f6, bishop takes, rook to c8. Now that was some of the commentators were suggesting what would happen in this game. And as you can see, it's still a slight edge for black. After black played h6, Radjabov played rook to c8. Now, as we're getting closer to the time control at move 40, Radjabov is really, really low on time. The time becomes a critical factor in the next few moves. So I'm trying to do this from memory, but I believe Radjabov basically had less than 2 minutes left for 6 moves. And after he went rook to c8, Magnus went bishop to e6. Of course, we all see the trick. He's going to move the dark squared rook, or move the black rook, and take the knight or do whatever to expose the attack on the Radjabov's rook. He went rook to f8 and rook to f7. Magnus again is trying to trade the rooks off. Rook to h8. Now we all see why that the white rook can't take the pawn. If he does, king will just come here and it traps the rook. So that pawn cannot be taken. When rook to c7, and knight to b5. Now Radjabov is down now to about a minute, maybe less, and the clock's ticking away. This is world-class chess. These are world-class players. Magnus at the same time has to win this game. I consider this $1 million game. Roughly, even the challenger to a world championship gets almost $1 million. Not that Magnus needs the money, but it's a lot of money. It's a lot of pressure. These guys are both young, and this is the 13th round now. And you should see these guys. They look like they've been through a war, the both of them. You can tell they're dead tired. The stress is just taking it out of them terribly. Black goes rook to d7, and Radjabov goes back knight to d4. Now they're down. Now Radjabov is down to seconds now. There's not much left. I mean, he's running an instinct now. h5. Radjabov checks. Magnus blocks with a bishop. Radjabov goes to c8. King. Rook to a8. He's just moving a move. He needs to get these moves in. a6 for Magnus. Rook to c8 again. And once he got past the time control, it was funny. I think they both got up, or they both could tell a sigh of relief. Now at this point, you could just tell Magnus is just, he's just putting his hands through his hair. I mean, you can tell the pressure is just tremendous. I mean, this is for the world championship. Something he's been probably dreaming about since he was a boy, and I say that tongue-in-cheek because he's only 22 years old. And I remember watching a video when he was 13 as an international master, when he drew I shouldn't say a blitz game, but a short time game. I think they each had a half an hour on their clock when he drew Gary Kasparov. I remember I watched that video, and God, he's such a baby face. He looks so little, and he was 13 years old. And I know he didn't play in the last cycle or two for the World Championship because of FIDE's nonsense regulations and some of the nonsense that was going on. I mean, be honest with you, in my opinion, FIDE could screw up a one-car funeral, but that's just me. After rook to c8, rook to d6, and knight to c6 check. Magnus moves king to f6, and Radjabov goes back to knight to d4. What's going to happen is almost all the next play, the next few moves is going to be basically about this pawn. And you'll see what's coming in a few minutes. Bishop to e6. Now he's offering the trade of the bishop. And that in itself isn't so bad. This is somewhat of a close position. And those knights are going to be extremely agile, moving back and forth from the locked-in pawns. As you'll see in the endgame, these knights, there's a lot of tricky stuff that can happen. Rook to f8 check. King to e7. Rook back to a8. I think Radjabov would be more than happy with a draw at this point. But Magnus, he has to play on. He has to play to bare kings. He has to win this game. Rook to d7. Rook to b8. Rook to b7, trying to trade again. And finally, Radjabov does trade the rooks. Rook takes, knight takes. Now here we are, almost to move 50. You're playing the candidates final. And if I'm not mistaken, I know today, I'm not sure about this game, but I know today's round 14, I think they said they had over almost 200,000 different people log on during the course of this tournament. And I think they broke the record for single logons at one time. It was 20,000. It was an amazing thing. I mean, this is one of the most dramatic. I mean, this was like a movie for drama. It was really amazing. King to d2 for Radjabov, and Magnus starts moving his king up. King to c3, bishop to f7, knight to b3. Now the plan is going to be, Magnus is trying to win this pawn here. That's the long-term goal, I think, he was trying to do, and it took a lot of maneuvering. King to e5. Okay, after king to e5, Radjabov went bishop back to b1. At this point, I think Radjabov is just trying to maintain. Some of the suggestions instead of it would be f4, which was interesting. It'd be e takes in passant, bishop takes, knight to d6. Now that would give Radjabov 3 isolated pawns. So I doubt if he will go for that line. Black goes a5. I think Magnus is starting to get the idea of attacking White's c pawn. Being it's isolated, it's his chance to win it. Radjabov goes bishop to e2, bishop to e6. There'll be a little bit of maneuvering going on in the next few moves. Bishop back to f1. Now the way it works in the time controls in this tournament is when they get to move 60, they get a 30-second increment. No extra time on it, a half an hour, whatever. They received an hour in the 40th move. Now bishop at d7, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering going around here. Now I want you to take a look at underneath the board where I have the computer going. And it's really amazing to me how these guys, and we're talking about they got seconds or a minute on their clock, how they just figure out the moves. Or most of the time they're right under this kind of time pressure. Radjabov, the computer suggests bishop d2. That's what he moved. Magnus goes bishop to a4, threatening the knight. Moves the knight, knight to c5. That's a good spot for that knight. Well, for a couple of reasons. As you can see, the white knight cannot intrude into black's position. This square, and this square are all covered. And if you notice, black's knight is on a dark square where the white's bishop can't get to it. King to b2, bishop to e8, c3. He's maneuvering around his bishop now. He's going to be going after that pawn here shortly. Knight to c6 check. Now, unfortunately, moving that bishop caused a knight to get in. And Carlsen just moves his king back to d6. Knight to d4 back again. Knight to d7. Knight to b5 check. King up. Now, you're going to see shortly, white moves back knight to d4. Now, knight to e5. You can see the computer here has all the arrows pointing at c4. Black is hitting it 3 times, and white is defending it twice. Knight to b3 check, king to c6, a4. An interesting move might have been king to d4, and it would have been king back, knight to d2. Now we're on move 64, and what's happening is Radjabov is down 2 seconds. When I say seconds, I mean less than 30 seconds. And every time he moves, he picks up 30 seconds. And he's trying to hold on. He knows that c-pawn is eventually going to fall. And he knows that Magnus has to win this game. And of course, Magnus Carlsen has a reputation very much like the American, who I like a lot, and the Carl Nakamura, where these guys will play down the bare kings. And I like that. If you're on the receiving end of, if you're on the losing end of a game, it's not so great, but be prepared to play these guys down to the kings. King comes back, so I thought it was an interesting move. I look at the bottom of the screen, one of the suggested moves is knight to d4, and that's what he does. So computer suggests d6, that's what he does. Now this is under time pressure, folks. I know these moves are somewhat easy to find, but even still, Radjabov is down to seconds, literally. Knight to b5. Computer says king to c5. That's what Magnus does. Same with Radjabov. Knight goes back. Bishop to e8. That's what he does. These guys are, it's amazing to me. It's a behold to watch. I mean, these guys are young. They've got more experience than 100 players combined. Knight to b3 check, king to d6, c5 check. He's finally getting that pawn off the light square. King to c7. Now it's interesting, if bishop had taken, the sequence would have went knight to a5, bishop takes, knight checks, king to e6, knight takes, king takes, f4, d6, bishop to c4. Now at this point, both of them, especially Carlsen, they're playing on pure adrenaline and pure willpower. Radjabov's under a lot of stress too, but Magnus is the one that's got the stress on him. I mean, this is life-altering game. He wins this, the chances are him playing Vishy Anand later this year for the World Championship are extremely good. He knows if he ties Kramnik at the end, he wins on tie breaks. Radjabov plays king to d4. Magnus checks. King to c3. Knight to e7. There's a lot of maneuvering going around, but things are changing. And if you notice, it's just a slight advantage for black. Magnus has to make something out of nothing. He has to win this game. C takes, king takes, knight to d2. Now the new target now is white's a-pawn. Knight to c4. King to a6. Now, it's funny, he moves right into the pin. But if you look at the bottom of the screen, king to a6 or bishop to d7 are the computer's moves. Dead draw, 0.00. Can't get any closer than that. Magnus is pushing. Knight checks, and there wasn't any place decent to go to check where he could have won anything. King to a7, king to d4. Now, if you notice earlier on move 77, they repeated twice. It wasn't a threefold repetition, it was two. I think that was more for Radjabov, because every time he moves, he gets 30 seconds. Radjabov is down to less than a minute on every single move. I mean, how crazy is that? Knight to c6. The king moves. That was a move that they questioned. Everybody that was there would thought for sure when they ran this scenario that the king would go to d5. Now, if you look at the bottom, the computer is running. There's king to c5 and king to d5. They're both very close in score. Radjabov, we're playing blitz here for him. This is a world level game, and he's down to blitz moves, and he finds them. Knight to e5, and then Radjabov makes the mistake. Knight to c4. Instead of knight to c4, he should have went king to d4, forcing the knight to move, and then move the king up. As you can see, it's a very tiny advantage for black. But he went knight to c4. Now, he went after his black's a-pawn. I mean, he's playing on instinct now. He's trying to get rid of that knight. He's probably thinking, I can, blockade all the black's pawns are on light squares. I might be able to get behind them. All the white's pawns are on dark squares. He doesn't have to defend them from the bishop. He's probably desperately trying to draw. Knight to d3 check. There is the move. Now, if you notice, after knight to c4, knight to e5, it's a barely small advantage for black. That knight to c4 and then knight to d3, that was the breaking point. That's what Magnus was hoping to do. He was hoping to just keep playing, and in time pressure, his opponent would make a mistake. And I'll tell you the truth, with a little bit of time Radjabov had, I think he did very well to hang on this far. Unfortunately, it's the end. But there's so much stress and there's so much adrenaline flowing in Magnus. I remember watching the game, didn't look like he was confident to win. King moves, knight to c1, bishop to f1, bishop to b5, here it comes. Now the knight is pinned. Knight takes a5. On the computer he has double question mark, and if you see on the bottom, it's almost 3 points ahead for black, which is a full piece. What could he have done instead? King to c3 maybe? It's still bad. It's all bad. Now it's just a matter of technique. Bishop takes, knight, king to b6, knight to e7, knight to d3, knight takes, king, knight to e7, bishop to a3, an important move. He wants to move his bishop onto g4 to guard everything. Knight to d5 check, king to d6, white moves the knight, and bishop to g4. And Timur Radjabov resigns. Magnus Carlsen got a ton from nothing. What he did was he had a stronger will than Radjabov, who was having a bad tournament to begin with. But even still, these guys are so competitive that they don't want to lose no matter where their standings are in the tournament. It was an amazing game to watch. I remember watching it. Even the commentators were exhausted. And it showed at the press conference after with Radjabov and Carlsen. I use the expression all the time when I'm having a bad day or a tough day. It looks like somebody beat him up with a bag of nickels. I mean, Carlsen was just spent. just spent, and that was on the 13th round. The 14th round, it had some exciting games, but I can, do the spoiler now. Magnus end up, it's funny, now they're both tied. After round 13, Kramnik and Carlsen are both tied. I forget what they had, 8.5, I believe, out of 13. And in the 14th round, it was everything on the line. And it looks like Magnus was going to draw the game. And he pushed too hard and he started losing. But at the same time, with the Kramnik game in round 14, Kramnik started to lose to Vishy Anand. Anand, probably one of the most brilliant players that ever lived. He's incredibly hot and cold. I believe he lost 5 games in this tournament out of the 14 on time. But when Anand is on, he's one of the most brilliant players in the world. And the funny part was, the game that put Kramnik back in the tournament was Anand beating Carlsen. And now here's Vishy Anand beating Kramnik. Well, the end of the story goes kind of an anticlimax in a way. Carlsen loses round 14 the next game, but so does Kramnik, and they tie. And Carlsen wins on tiebreak. Carlsen goes to the World Championship. 22 years old. There's never been anyone that young since the early 1980s when Garry Kasparov beat, their marathon round 1 of the World Championship that was called off and redone. It's amazing. This Carlsen kid is the real deal. He's young. He has the willpower. He has the determination. He has the drive. He has the fight. And I like Vishy Anand. I think he's another brilliant player. And it's going to be sad if either one of them loses. But somebody has to lose. That's the way these things are. There has to be a loser and there has to be a winner. I'm not sure when the date's going to be. It's going to be later this year. They're not even sure on the locale. But it's going to be amazing. I think because of Carlsen's age, it's going to bring a ton of young people worldwide into chess, which could be nothing but a good thing. Especially in his country of Norway. They mob him now wherever he goes. I've seen videos on the internet that just shows these huge crowds. And congratulations to Magnus Carlsen, the winner of the candidates final, played in London, England. I believe it was from March 15th through April 1st. It was an 8-man tournament, a double round robin, which means 14 games. Everybody play everybody twice with black and white. It's probably the fairest of the some of the things they've done to have the World Challenger come up. I think a long round robin like that is very fair. The cream comes to the top, so to speak. There were some great games in this tournament. This game, I think, was more a question of will. And I'll repeat the title again. Never, 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 never give up. And that's it for this game, folks. Thank you for watching. I want you to remember that if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. And I hope to see all of you in the next video, and hopefully later in the year, the World Championship match, Magnus Carlsen versus the World Champion Vishy Anand. Bye-bye, folks. Take care.